back to class. I'm going to continue to talk a little bit more about George Gershwin. That's what you're hearing in the background. A little fascinating rhythm. Can you imagine? Now, you did assignment 1 where you had to write a lyric, and maybe you even put one into the discussion group. Imagine somebody gives you this music and says, would you write a lyric to that? Well, when George gave it to Ira, his brother, Ira said, oh, gosh, George, I don't know. I don't know how to write. That's so difficult a rhythm. I know you want it to be called Syncopated City, but regardless, it's a fascinating rhythm. And there you go. He found a way in to how to write the lyrics for that. Very difficult. The guy was like threading a needle when it came to writing lyrics. Very hard. Definitely worth listening to the words. George Gershwin is quoted as saying, I'd like to write of the melting pot of New York City itself. This would allow for many kinds of music, black and white, Eastern and Western, and would call for a style that would achieve out of this diversity, artistic unity. It's a pretty big goal. George Gershwin's childhood was the perfect preparation for capturing the rhythms of New York's melting pot. Born in Brooklyn in 1898, his parents were Russian immigrants who constantly moved around the city, living in 28 apartments in all. First trained on a piano purchased for his older brother Ira, George quit high school and found a job as a song plugger. What is a song plugger, you may ask? Well, that would be a person on Tin Pan Alley in one of the big music stores, and they'd play songs so that people could hear them and kind of try them out before buying the sheet music and seeing if they wanted to sing it. So as a song plugger, he would demonstrate material on Tin Pan Alley. He used to make $15 a week at Remix. In vaudeville days, that is exactly where people who wanted to know how songs would sound would go, is to Remix. And people would say, go to the room that George is in with that Pride piano. It's the best. You'll definitely hear the song. He played for people who wanted to know how the songs would sound. That's plugging. Selling. Very American. It's like somebody could come in and drive your car, take your car for a test drive. You could take the song for a test drive. He got very, very good at improvising and selling the song. He developed in his piano style something that became very common in his writing style. He was a composer who came from what he could play. Now, back in the day, everybody had a piano. And there were player pianos where you get a roll that you could put in the piano and you'd pump the pedals and the roll would play and the keys would play themselves. So George Gershwin played, and when he played, this punched holes in the piano roll. You could get a George Gershwin piano roll and see exactly how he played. So some people would say when they listened to those piano rolls that it sounded like 20 fingers flying in every direction. He found in his fingers voicings and jazz sounds, and to move up in the world of Tin Pan Alley, George Gershwin went to see who else? Who's the other big composer of the day? Irving Berlin. And when he went to see Berlin, he was auditioning. He knew, as everybody else did at the time, that Irving Berlin could only play in one key and he didn't know how to write down the music. So he had to audition for someone who could listen to him play, take dictation, write it down, and make it sound better, change the keys, that kind of thing. So when George went to audition for him for this position, he sat down at the piano and played it so dynamically. Irving Berlin's response was, "Don't be my secretary, kid. Go out and write your own songs." When Gershwin wasn't plugging tunes on Tin Pan Alley, he hung out in saloons and cabarets in Hell's Kitchen in Harlem, where black musicians were transforming ragtime into jazz. James P. Johnson and Lucky Roberts talked of a story where they were talking with U.B. Blake. And they were talking about this very talented au fait pianist at Remix. And U.B. Blake said, this white guy, was good enough to learn some of those difficult tricks that only a few of us could master, which was a big compliment. Au fait was not such a compliment, by the way. That was something you'd call a white person back then, kind of like a cracker. George Gershwin was a rehearsal pianist. He was accompanist to vaudeville people. He was writing reviews. He played for anyone who would take his songs and perform them. Al Jolson heard him play at a party, and he liked the song that he played so much that he recorded it in early 1920. And it turned out to be the most successful song in George Gershwin's whole life. He never had a song come close to the sales that he had for Swanee. Not one of my favorite songs, but he made some good money on it.
I've been away from you a long time. I never thought I'd miss you so. Somehow I feel your love is real. Near you I want to be. The birds are singing, it is song time. The band goes drumming soft and low. I know that you're calling too. Swanee, you're calling me. Swanee, how I love you, my dear old Swanee. I'd give the world to be among the folks here. CIX, I even know my mammy's waiting for me, praying for me down by the Swanee. The folks up north won't see me no more when I get to that Swanee
So we've had some conversations about Al Jolson already. He was a big diva, but he was so well loved that his recording of that song made more money than any other song that Gershwin wrote. And there were lots of much better songs than that as far as I'm concerned. But writing music for 4 of the George White scandals, this is how George Gershwin got practice. He would write music for George White's scandals, and he also wrote 7 Broadway shows throughout the 1920s. George Gershwin actually filled Broadway with his own unique style of jazz music. George Gershwin loomed above the crowd like an enormous spotlight. Melodies leaked from his fingertips, innovative, beautiful, rhythmic. Yeah. There was a story that I read about somebody who saw a Gershwin musical called Tiptoes. And in the show was a girl named Queenie Smith. It was dazzling. It was the first musical that this person had ever seen. They thought it was unbelievable. Sweet and Low Down is an amazing number, and it was visually something people never forgot. It had people on the stage with trombones. Gershwin's music was so infectious that when the cast all played their trombones and stomped their feet, the audience stomped along as well. Tiptoes featured lyrics by George's older brother, Ira, who became known as the jeweler because of his ability to set words into musical phrases. Ira's first Broadway show with his brother was Lady Be Good in 1924, which starred Fred Astaire and his sister Adele. Everybody knows Fred and Ginger, but did you know he was a star way before on vaudeville with his sister? And even Fred would say Adele was the more talented of the two. The show produced one of Gershwin's most enduring hits, originally titled Syncopated City. Now you know which one I'm talking about. This is the one that had the most intricate rhythmical musical songs that anybody had ever written for a Broadway musical. And poor Ira, when he heard George play the melody with that very tricky, irregular rhythms, he finally said, well, I think I have a way in, because it has a fascinating rhythm. Let me help you by, let's listen to Fred and Adele sing this.
Rhythm, 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 the pitter pass through my brain. The dawn's distant, the day is distant, but it'll drive me insane. This morning without any warning, and hangs around me all day. Someday I'll think of to it, someday I'll speak to it. I hope it listens when I say, fascinating rhythm, got me on the go. Fascinating rhythm, I'm on the way to run. I'll bet you make it the day before I know why I'm always shaking. Oh, how I long to be the man I used to be. Fascinating rhythm, you gotta stop picking on me.
Fascinating rhythms seem to capture what George's music captured, the energy of the Jazz Age, the feel of New York.
Fascinating rhythm on a river. Watching those shaking like a river.
When you think of George and Ira shows, you think of Coney Island. You kind of think of hot dogs and roller coasters and New York, the energy of the Jazz Age, the feel of New York. The rhythms of the Gershwin shows are jazz-like. When you think of George and Ira's songs, the way they work together, the lights come on at twilight, the tap dancing chorus girls. I just think George and Ira Gershwin are really the names that kind of help conjure the Jazz Age. Here's a song that I think you'll know.
The Bronx is Staten Island too.
It's lovely going through
It's very fancy. I know the Lancey Street, you know.
the subway charms us all with balmy breezes blow.
To and fro. And tell me what street compares with Mott Street.
And tell
in
me
July.
what street compares to Mott Street in July. Ha!
Fly
Those rhymes.
by.
The great big city's a wondrous home.
Just made for a girl.
And boy,
We turn into an island of joy. We go beyond where true love conquers in the wilds.
and start together, dear.
Broadway musicals of that time and musical reviews were really integral to a kind of revolution that goes on in the American language in the 1920s. One humorist said that when we Americans get through with the English language, it's going to look like it's been run over by a musical comedy. Here's another song. Now this is slang, making whoopee. You might have heard this one too. Whoopee was slang for sex back then, so it's kind of risque.
Wait a minute, girls. You've got plenty of time. Here it is. Every time I hear that dear old wedding march, I feel rather glad I have a broken arch. I have heard a lot of married people talk, and I know that marriage is a long, long walk. To most people, weddings mean romance, but I prefer a picnic or a dance. Another bride, another groom. The countryside is all in bloom. The flowers and trees, the birds and bees are making whoopee. The choir sings, here comes the bride. Another victim is by her side. He's lost his reason, 'cause it's the season for making whoopee. Down through the countless ages, you'll find it everywhere. Somebody makes good wages, somebody wants her share. She calls him Toodles and rolls her eyes. She makes him strudels and bakes him pies. What is it all for? It's so he'll fall for making whoopee.
Playing with language like that, you can see how he said the English language is going to sound like it's been run over by a musical comedy. This is an era when Americans really became conscious of how wonderfully vibrant their language is. And the language is being registered by songwriters, but also by journalists. So that a writer like Walter Winchell can take a term like whoopee, which was kind of a code word for sex, and then a Broadway composer like Gus Kahn can write a song for Eddie Cantor called Makin' Whoopee. And you begin getting particularly around Broadway, a new argot that's coming out. You're getting words like turkey, hit, click, fan, these wonderful words that are coming out of Broadway and then disseminated by radio and syncopated newspapers around the country, writing in a very staccato style, punctuated by dots and dashes on newspaper. One newspaper columnist held sway as the bard of Broadway, Walter Winchell. He turned the page into a stage. So out there in America, people heard about this racy land of jazz and dance and drinking and parties and sexy, beautiful people through Walter Winchell. I have a little bit of dialogue here to share. He had a radio show. Lady called in and goes, well, I don't understand your latest article. Winchell says, it's your nickel. What's on your alleged mind? In today's column, what the devil did you mean when you said one of the STEM's most prominent phonies went gay in a whoopee asylum the other morning and sacked 4 Chicago gorillas and then had to spend plenty on giggle waters to square themselves? What does any of that mean? Well, that's Broadway slang. It's slang, Broadway slang. And it means that one of the 4 flushes along the main stem went into one nightclub and got very intoxicated. When he spoke out of turn to stop the tough guys from Chicago from taking him for a ride, I mean, person's got to spend a lot of money on a lot of laughing soup. A lot of what? A lot of fun milk. I don't get you. Oh, on a lot of joy juice, a lot of I want to dream Sarah, firewater, whiskey. Winchell's nicknames for Broadway celebrated all its various guises. He called it the hardened artery, the big gulch, the grandest canyon, Baloney Boulevard, and most famously, the Big Apple. That's where that name comes from, Walter Winchell. Winchell called Broadway the Big Apple, the goal of all ambition, the pot of gold at the end of a drab and somewhat colorless rainbow. The moniker he made up of the Big Apple was Broadway, but it became a symbol for the entire city. Let me give you a little Manhattan. This is Gershwin's Rhapsody in Blue, which was used in Woody Allen's movie, Manhattan. But the composer, Richard Rodgers, started to take up from Gershwin. What he did,
New York City.
what Richard Rodgers did was to take the music and blend it with all of the classes. Richard Rodgers himself was born in Upper Manhattan, and he was raised in a middle-class Jewish family. And he was kind of weaned on comic operas and the music of Jerome Kern. His partner, the lyricist Lorenz Hart, showed an early gift for poetry and delighted in the lyrics of Gilbert and Sullivan operas. Despite placing a song in a Broadway show in 1919, real success, it just eluded them. They were around all the people who were making all of the sounds and all of the music, but they couldn't really get a hit. Producers and music publishers alike rejected their work. But in 1925, they finally broke through with, let me see if I can find it for you. I'll take Manhattan. Here we go.
From a journey to Niagara and to other places aggravating.
Wish I could make it a little louder.
Will you feel the
You get that opera to feel from the women's voices because they're very high pitched and soprano, and the men would be very, very tight and very specific. And then they would both hit a chorus that was a little more mixed class. I'll take Manhattan, the Bronx and Staten Island too.
lovely going?
It's lovely going through the zoo. It's so fancy on Delancey Street, you know. The subway charms us so. I love it, to and fro. And then tell me what street compares with Mott Street in July. Think of that lyric. Watt and Mott. It's pretty good.
The great big city's a wondrous
The city's a wondrous toy, made for a girl and boy. It turns Manhattan into an Isle of Joy. That was Rodgers and Hart's first big hit. We'll take Manhattan, the Bronx and Staten Island too. Now tell me what street compares with Mott Street in July. Sweet push carts gently glide, dames by. Very intricate the way it works with Rodgers' music. It became an enormous hit around the country, and people then began for the first time to listen to the lyrics in American Broadway musicals, the way they'd always listened to them in Gilbert and Sullivan. Gilbert and Sullivan had all of the humor in their lyrics, like, if I were not a little mad and generally silly, I should give you my advice upon the subject willy-nilly. I would show you in a moment how to grapple with the question, and you'd really be astonished at the force of my suggestion on the subject. I shall write you a most valuable letter, full of excellent suggestions when I feel a little better, but at present I'm afraid I am as mad as any hatter, so I'll keep them to myself, for my opinion doesn't matter. Not much in the music there, but the lyrics are very silly. At that point, it was a new age of lyrics in the Broadway musical. In a show called A Connecticut Yankee, Hart combined the old English world of King Arthur with the new American vernacular. Let me grab that for you. The show is maybe the first taste of something you would see from Something Rotten. We do that still now, where we mix things in musicals, different ages, and still bring it up to slang.
Are not mine eyes fair to
Let me get to the chorus.
words that queer?
Here we go.
Thy words are queer,
Thy
sir,
words
unto
are
thine
clear,
ear,
sir.
Yet are the dear, sir, to me.
She's
thou
calling them
art
sir
now dost thou try night.
and using thou.
I murmur swell too, and like it well too. More thou wilt tell too. Sandy, thou art dandy, now art thou my knight.
Now art thou my knight.
Thine arms are martial, thou hast great and other resting. Thou swell,
There it is. Thou swell, thou witty,
thou sweet,
thou sweet,
thou grand,
thou grand wouldst kiss me pretty, would hold my hand.
of thine eyes
So that mix of old, I guess, knights and damsels in distress sort of language, not an accurate depiction, but that mixed with slang helped to really set the scene. And in 1927, the year the Connecticut Yankee opened, the team of Rodgers and Harts had 4 shows on Broadway. Richard Rodgers was only 25 years old. Larry Hart, 32. They were part of a whole new generation at that point in time. It was a new generation of songwriters that was busy making Broadway the place to be. Richard Rodgers once described opening nights. He and all his colleagues, all the other composers, would go to everybody else's show. They'd all want to see everyone else's opening night. And Gershwin, for example, would come out with a wonderful new rhythm or a syncopation or something, and Rodgers would race right home and have to try to top it. Everyone knew and played with each other's work. Everyone read the same newspapers. Everyone read the same columns. And once you were accepted on Broadway, either as a performer or a writer, or you created a show that was a hit, then you were ready for the whole world. 1927 was a giddy time for Broadway, for Wall Street, for Main Street, USA. Let me give you some of that music.
We've always thought knowledge is not, we should be taught to dance. Right here at Tate, we're up to date, we teach a great new dance. Don't think that I brag, I speak of the drag. Why should a sheik learn how to speak Latin and Greek? Badly, give him a neat motto, complete, say it with feet. Gladly, first lesson right now. You'll love it and how you'll love it. Here is the drag. See how it goes? Down on your heels, up on your toes. That's the way to do the varsity drag. Hotter than hot, new as a new.
Americans had heroes with nicknames like the Sultan of Swat and Lucky Lindy. Women's skirts were the shortest of the decade, and the world was listening to Broadway tunes on the radio, on phonograph recordings, and in dance halls and nightclubs. Broadway created the reckless exuberance of youth, flappers, fans, and the latest dance craze. The biggest hit that year was Good News, the show, with a score by the trio De Silva, Brown, and Henderson. The first act dance number was known as the Varsity Drag. Down on your heels, up on your toes, that's the way to do the Varsity Drag. Ira and George Gershwin heard from their own mother, "Why can't you write hits like De Silva, Brown, and Henderson boys? Those boys know what they're doing." Can't argue with Mom. They were the stars of that period. Their shows ran longer than anyone else's. Their shows were about good times, about people passing footballs and winning girls. They were about guys golfing and sinking a putt. It's the optimism of Broadway. The show Good News was one of over 50 musicals that opened in 1927, a year in which 8 new Broadway theaters were constructed. In one record night that season, 11 productions opened, and the following night, Showboat. You've already heard about Showboat. Premiered at the Ziegfeld. As we already know, that show meant that the Broadway musical would not hit such heights again in decades. But that's where we are heading. So I hope you take a look in my courses. Be sure to look at the lecture. Go on over to assignments and see if there's something for this week. I've tried to give you something each week. These are not meant to be terrible challenges. These are meant to be exercises to get you into the groove of the American musical theater. The quizzes, I promise, are now going to be more multiple choice or true false, so they shouldn't take very much of your time. And I'll keep reminding you week to week. Be sure to make a time to come back and visit, and I'll see you at the next lecture.